way of working to capture detail, and it can be sustained for long periods or briefer, but not nearly as brief as gesture. And you tend to use just your wrist and your hand. You don't move a lot when you're making a contour drawing. Gesture's the opposite. You probably know the word for gestural line more as a sketchy line. And I do a lot of sketching on site. And when I'm sketching, people are moving, animals are moving, vehicles are driving by, musicians are playing instruments. In fact, for Juneteenth, I was in Austin and I was drawing some musicians, some DJs, and that was a lot of fun. And I used gestural line to do that. Okay, so the purpose of gesture is to capture the whole form. And then if you have time, you can go in and get the details. But it's really about capturing the whole form of the person, the object, the building, whatever you're sketching, the plant. It's done quickly and spontaneously. Like I said, I understand if you want to use a pencil with eraser first, but it does tend to limit the spontaneity of your line work in ink. You can use, but you don't have to use ink. You can use a pencil for making a gestural drawing. Okay, so it's not as precise and as tight as contour line. You can use both in the same picture. Contour lends structure, while gesture adds energy. Okay. Now, it's typically used for figure drawing, but we're not going to do figure drawing in this class. You can take my sketch journalism class where we do go out and draw people. We were doing that 2 weeks ago at a local dog park, and the class they were drawing each other too. So for a gestural line drawing, the average time can range from 1 to 20 minutes. I've done gestural sketches that are just lines, stick figures that took seconds, but I captured the pose of the person. Okay, so I recommended plants for tonight. You're going to draw rapidly and continuously. You should draw not what the model object looks like, but what he, she, it is doing. The line should have a scribble-like quality. Feel how the figure object lifts, droops, pushes forward, and pulls back. The figure object may appear only somewhat apparent, like a tangle of fishing line. Let the pencil line travel through the forms as well as the outside of the form. It is only the action, the gesture, that you are trying to respond to here, not the details of the structure. But you can get more detailed after you get the overall look of the plant or whatever you're drawing. Gesture is dynamic, moving, it's not static. So it has no precise edges, no exact shape, no gelled form. Gesture is movement in space. So try to think about the model, object's pose in your own body. Does your plant need some watering? Is it a little droopy? Kind of droop. Is it, or maybe you did water it and it's very happy and it's standing very vertical, and so think about stretching your backbone, just like your plant is stretching its stalk. So try not to get hung up on one part, especially if the plant has a blossom. Think about the leaves and the stalks. Try to get all of the whole object drawn quickly, and you can work lightly and then go back in and go darker. Okay. You can even add color, like I said, if you want, with markers or with watercolor pencils. So these are some of my sketches. I'll physically show you this one tonight. Okay, and here's some other sketches I did. I might have this one. I don't have this one. I gave this to a friend named Susan. so it seemed appropriate. Okay, and just like with contour, remember to change your line density. Okay. Now, we mainly want to work with line, but like I said, if you wanted to add a little color, it's okay. All right, so that's your handout for this week. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing these. So these are some drawings that I did in Japan when I was teaching study abroad for Alamo colleges. And this is combining graphite pencil with pen and ink. I believe I was using a Pitt pen, and a little bit of color pencil, not watercolor pencil, just color pencil. And it's a full moon maple. Isn't that nice? So I'll hold it up. This was at a park it was actually a former samurai estate, and it's an inner city park now. And when I teach study abroad, we are very, very busy during the day, physically going from place to place, and I was really exhausted at the end of the day. So this park was in the Roppongi Hills, which is a very shishi part of Tokyo. All the diplomats live there. But I would go there just to be quiet and have some calm at the end of my day. So you'll see quite a few sketches that I did in that park that I'll show you. But I don't start these with pencil. I start them with a pen. But I was very quickly getting a sense for the leaves, and then I just went ahead and decided to shade some with pencil. But it's just very, very quick, very loose. Here's another one, and I believe this was from that same park. And this one I used markers, but it was just took me, maybe 20 minutes to do. Now, this is more sustained, and I finished this in my hotel room. And this was a plum tree that was at a beautiful garden. It was a well-known castle in Tokyo. Was this Tokyo? No, this was in Kyoto that we visited. And later, I used in Japan, you can get these gold markers that are really neat. But I sort of had an epiphany once I got back to my hotel, because I realized that the tree itself was like a form of calligraphy, that it looked like hiragana, the way of writing, which is inspired by Chinese characters. So and this was in a show actually in South Korea, in Busan. So you can kind of see the gold and how it shimmers. And so it started off gestural, but later I spent more time developing the background. Look at a few other mediums that I've used to depict plants. This was from Enchanted Rock, and this used colored pencil to depict a soto in bloom. So in one of the vernal pools at Enchanted Rock. This was in France, and this is using watercolor with color fine line markers. I like Prismacolor fine line, and we're focusing on plants. But the Alps were here. I was in Burgundy, and the Alps were just off into the horizon. So these are flowers that do well in mountainous areas, columbines and whatnot. This is Thésée, France. And you also can get a little sense for depth, atmospheric depth with this. And next week, well, not next week, but it's the week after next, we'll talk about how to do this, how I drew that house in the barn, how to depict the geometric forms of that structure. And this was a study of a banana tree. Look at my line quality. It's very sketchy. Okay, that's gesture. And then I went in with a little bit of watercolor. And there's the bananas with the banana blossom. And this is in the Houston Zoo. And I make notes sometimes on my sketches. I'm an amateur naturalist. But this, beyond observational drawing, and you should, you can look around your home, like go get a mushroom and flip it on its cap, and that's it. They're fantastical forms to study. I've done lots of mushroom drawings and mixed media works. And it can be like sketching gesturally, like this was in '07 when the ice storm hit San Antonio. This was the mesquite tree in my backyard, and the icicles were hanging down and looked like teeth. And then I had a knot on it, so the whole tree became like a creature. But it also helped me remember, like an important event. And sometimes the sketches can take on a life of their own, just like the mesquite tree. This, I was drawing a cactus in Pecos, Texas, and it ended up looking like a maiden with her hair in coils. Like it was a Princess Leia cactus. But look at the quick use of line in these. That's gesture. I'm interested in plants that have thorns. So this is a drawing I did using pencil. And that's starting to it's still gestural, but it's starting to really get into shading. And I did a lot of variations on that theme. Okay, so you could start to have a theme with what you're doing. And they could be very delicate little drawings. This one, the use of the negative space around the sketch is distinctive. It's not centered, it's off to the left. And you do see this a lot in like Rinpa painting from Japan and throughout Asia, the use of lots of negative space. And also I did a little bit of hatching and stippling there. I get more into that with my sketch journalism classes. But we'll learn about shading when we get to studying value, okay? And then this I did for the national parks. They did a broadcast of me sketching my prickly pears in my front yard. So this is definitely using gestural line. Now I was working with color pencil, graphite, and then color pencil. But just look at the energy of the line work in the blossoms. It's very, very loose. I'm not creating just a hard outline that I'm trying to stick to. And that adds energy. And then it's kind of a large sketch, so it's hard for me to get it all under the camera. But notice how I just I brought the rest of the sketch I just did as pencil and let the color pencil kind of fade off. I did that on the side too. So you don't have to like finish everything. I wanted the focal point on this pad with these blossoms. So you're the artist, you direct the viewer towards what you want them to look at. But I still needed to do a little something with the surrounding space, just to give it a little nudge, add a little variety, and make it somewhat interesting, but not as interesting as this. Alright, so those are a few of my samples. And, first, before you start to draw your plant, we need to look at our mediums that we're going to work with. Let's see if that So this is using ink. And this was on like a watercolor paper. So why don't you get a scratch piece of the paper you're going to work on, whether you're going to use the Tombow or whether you're going to use a brush with ink, okay? Because we want to test out those materials, and I want you to get comfortable with your tool before we begin to work. I think the last time I taught this class, I did that plant, and I did that in pencil. So if you're working in pencil, you could do something along these lines. Notice how I changed the density of the line, but it started to really become kind of a cross between contour and gesture. And that's okay if that happens for you. Over here. Let me get my nice white sheet of paper, ink on it. I'd have some paper towels. You're going to need a jar with some water. Like I like to use glass jars. This is wee yogurt. They're just the perfect size. So I recommend, and they're yummy. So go get yourself some wee yogurt. Walmart. I don't usually shop there, but when I do, I get wee yogurt. I actually don't have Higgins tonight. Higgins ink. I have some ink from Jerry's. So their Soho brand at Jerry's Artorama, it comes with a dropper. So the Higgins ink or the Jerry's Soho brand, the dropper is convenient. If you get this on your clothes, it's permanent. So just FYI. And this is the kind of lid I recommend putting ink into. Okay, it's a deep lid, and if you have several, you can add water to some of the ink, and then you can get variations in value. In other words, you can get gray. And if you don't have, you can use semi ink as well if you prefer to work with that. Either's fine. India ink or semi. Okay, so you get some brushes. I would recommend you work with a round brush tonight. Okay, so if you have some watercolor brushes, that would be best versus working with flat brushes or oil-based brushes. I recommend the round ones for what we're going to do. This is probably better size. Okay, this size brush. This one's getting a little big for what we're doing tonight. Okay, but I also have the Tombow. Okay, so I'll start with the Tombow and then I'll switch over to the ink. Okay, so this is the Tombow marker that I wanted you all to get, and they come in lots of different colors, but you just need black for this class. And the Tombow marker has two ends. So it has one end that's just like a regular felt pen that you can make a line about like that. It's like about a 0.05 if you were using, or a medium pit pen. The other tip is calligraphic. It's a brush tip. So it depending upon how you hold it, try different angles and try different movements with your wrist and arm, and you'll see different effects. So if you just use the tip, you can make like a broken line like that. Okay? You press the tip down, you can make like a dark straight line. If you hold it more at an angle, you can get a tapered stroke. And it can get quite thick. These are used for calligraphy as well as by the manga artist to illustrate. This type of Tombow is water soluble, so you can also add water to it and it will dissolve. It becomes a cool black wash. And that's true. They have some that are non-water soluble too, but these are water soluble. Okay, so try out your Tombow marker and get comfortable with it. And you can make dots, you can see, with the calligraphic tip. And you can, so those of you that like to hatch, you can do some hatching. We'll talk about that when we get to using value. Okay, there we go. And if you need like a smaller, not such a thick line, then you can switch to the other tip. Okay? Which you can see is thinner. Now, just to show you what I meant about it being water soluble, I'm going to demonstrate. So I do it like that, and then I take some water, and as you can see, it's making a wash, and it's kind of a greenish black. I'll hold it up so you can see it. So that's something really neat about these markers. They're good for travel because you can use them as watercolors. You can draw with them and use them as watercolors. You can't take tubes of paint on a plane. You have to check it in. They'll take your watercolors, okay? They will. Ever since 9/11, that's been the rule. No tubes of paint on a plane. All right, so now let's try our India ink, our Sumi ink, whatever you are using. This is Sumi ink, so I have both. This one's not ground up. You can buy Sumi ink that's in a bottle. Yasutomo out of California makes some really neat Sumi inks in a bottle. They have some that I've done work with. You can get them at Herwick's, bottles that have gold pigment in them. Some have silver. They're really neat. But this is actually ink. That's Sumi ink. It's not the same thing as India ink. They're different materials. Some kind of carbon, soot, burnt material is used to create the pigment in both, but the binders are different. This is using rabbit glue to hold it together, which is a common glue used all over the world. Alright, so I'm going to take my India ink. They have different properties, Sumi versus India. They're not the same properties. They interact differently. I find with India ink, when you paint something and then you paint on top, after it dries and then you paint on top of it, you cover it completely. But with Sumi ink, you can layer. So if you do a stroke with Sumi ink and then you put another layer of ink on top, you will still see that stroke underneath it, which is an interesting property. So you can get these at Herwick's or Jerry's. And some of them are quite decorative, like they'll have dragons and phoenixes in them and whatnot. This one's rather plain, but it does have the characters. Okay, so there's my India ink. You might need to shake the bottle some when you squirt it out in case the pigment has settled. Okay, so you're going to take your brush, and you can dip your brush a little in water. Just don't have it super saturated, or it's going to make your ink gray. Okay, unless we're just going to dip into our ink, and then just like what I was doing with the Tombow, try some lines. Okay, and as you lift the brush off the paper, it'll taper. So try different angles of holding the brush and experimenting. If I hold it quite vertical, I can get that kind of broken line, like what I was doing with the Tombow. If I really press down, I get a very thick line. Try angling. You can see that is making a very thick line. And as the ink runs out of the brush, I get what's called dry brush, which is a very nice textured effect with ink. And the more, so if you can keep using your brush, and you'll get more and more dry. See all that dry brush? And there's a texture on this paper. This is watercolor paper. So textured paper will catch the ink and like make a texture. Okay? I could do stippling, although a smaller brush would be a little better for that. Stippling, making dots. You can use these to create value or texture, like fur or bumps or spots on a fruit or plant. Okay, now let's let's try to get a little variation in value. Okay, so the way we're going to do that now is to add some water. And when it dries lighter than what you see when it's shiny. And that's the rule of thumb. If it's shiny, it's wet. Now, if you keep layering ink, India ink starts to have a sheen to it, like a glossy sheen, which I like. I think it's interesting. If you, I mean, I know I have a student in my, Jalen, you're in my water media class. When I build up a net, like I do some interesting special effects with saran wrap, and I can build up really neat shiny, thick layers of ink. Get a little more water, and I dry the saran wrap on top, and it makes cool textures. Okay, so now I'm getting some gray. So throughout Asia, this is the main way, like with Sumi ink, not India ink, but this is the main way to draw and paint. On silk, on paper, with very limited color. So it's a really different tradition from Western approaches. Okay, so you can see I'm getting a nice wash here. I find India ink is a warm, brownish black, gray. So you can look, it's different from the Tombow. The Tombow is cool gray. The India ink is a warm, makes a warm gray. Okay, so keep playing with your inks and or pens until you feel comfortable. I am going to go ahead and show you one other tool, and I think it's on your supply list. I didn't require you to get it, but hopefully I've got a nib going here. But a quill. Before the modern pen was invented and mass-produced, mechanically produced, like think about the Declaration of Independence. How did John Hancock do it? Did he sign that or was it the Constitution? What did he sign it with? Any idea? Well, it comes from an animal. Something that comes from an animal. Feathers, yes. So a quill traditionally was used. And I don't think I have a nib to go in the quill with me, but I'll show you the handle. But I'll use another tool that kind of relates. But this is a handle, and you may have calligraphy pens, but a metal piece just sits in here, and then you can stick it into the ink and you can make fine lines. And it is a very different type of line than working with a mechanical pen. It's more about the hand. It has a more human touch to it than using a pen, a mechanical pen. But you can be innovative and take a unique approach. Like you could go out in your yard and find a stick, okay, and dip it in the ink and draw with it. That made a nice line. So think about outside the box. About you don't have to go to the art supply store to buy all your tools to work with. You might have some in your yard. Alright, so now I'm going to switch to my drawing pad and start to work on my snake plant. And before I do that, I'll go ahead and show you a little bit. It's assuming, why not? We have enough time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mix some sumi ink here, okay? And it's a little bit laborious, but there's a purpose to that, which is to prepare yourself for being creative. That the act of mixing the sumi ink, the rubbing it in a circle, it's almost meditative. You are preparing to create, and you move it in a circle, and with the water, it dissolves. And traditionally, this would have been done on a slate, like a little dish made out of slate, black slate. But I'm going to use my lid there. Okay, and now I've made my sumi ink. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. We'll compare it with the India ink. So it's even warmer, I think, in tone than the India ink. The India ink is a little cooler in tone. But it can get quite dark. I just went over my tone bow mark. And I think, I'm gonna layer this here. I'm gonna go over this with sumi, and I'll show you that transparency that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, you can, even with it wet, you can see the India ink underneath those strokes. So it's a different material, and as it's drying, it's a bit more grayish than the India ink. If you buy it in the bottle, it's already been mixed for you, so that's convenient, but this allows you to change your ratio of water to ink. Okay? Alright, now I'm going to start my snake plant. Now, you could, like if I wanted to figure out where this is going to go on my picture plane, and you should start to give that some consideration. It's not a huge consideration yet, but do you want to work landscape style, in which case you're going to show the plant and then the shadow coming off from it? Is it a window box? If it's a window box, if it's a long, low container, then this might be a better approach. If it's very vertical, though, then you might want to do it portrait style. Okay? And then just think about your space. And next time, we're going to be discussing positive shape versus negative shape. So when I draw, I'm drawing the positive shape, and everything around it is the negative shape. But you still have to consider the negative shape, and that's what we'll focus on next week. Okay? So I'm going to work vertically with this, and turn your plant until you, and again, those of you that, here, you can see my snake plant that I'm going to be working with. Okay, I held it up to the camera earlier, but you probably recognize it. They're all throughout San Antonio. They love living here. Okay. So if you're going to do a sketch in pencil, you want to keep it very light. Do not do it hard. I'll go ahead and do that for you. You can see me do it. Now, probably the container that you have the plant in is circular. Okay, so and I'll hold up something for you to look at. Okay, so this is circular. Okay, it's a lid. Everybody should be seeing a circle. Okay, now I'm going to tilt this. And as I tilt it, I want you to tell me what shape you see. Is it still a circle? That's right, Jude. It's more of an oval or an ellipse. So things that are circles, when you see them on edge, they become an ellipse. They distort. So your plant that is in your pot, when you see it on the edge of the circle for the pot, it's an ellipse. Unless you're standing right over your plant, which I doubt you are. Okay, so when you start to draw that pot, you need to think about that. Okay? And I'll go ahead and I'll start my plant, and I think, let me think about my spacing, how I want to space it. You don't have to show the whole plant, so I'm going to do something wild and crazy. I'm going to crop my plant. Cropping means when you let it go off the edge of the page. Okay? So I'll go ahead and draw my ellipse for the pot. I'm a wild and crazy guy. That's Saturday Night Live. From long ago, I think that was Steve Martin and somebody else. Wild and crazy guys. Okay, there's my pot, and let me get this up a little higher. Okay, so you can see I'm gonna have my plant come out like this. So I cropped the pot. This is an ellipse. Okay, now I'm just going to get a very loose sense of the plant, and I don't want to get too caught up in detail. Just some feeling for some of the leaves of this plant, which are very, it's perfect for tonight because it's like a dancer. The way the leaves contort, they move in and out, and just like a dancer would. And I notice the tapered effect of the leaves. They're thick at the bottom and then they come to a point. And organic forms, like we saw last time with seashells, may be very complicated. But if you don't get it quite right, nobody will know. Try to be as accurate as you can, but if you put a leaf out of place, I won't know. And try to pay attention to how leaves have this sort of, they have a backside and an underside, and or an underside, and how it kind of curls up, and then like a leaf will, and reveals the top side of the leaf. But there's a lot of movement with this plant, so I can kind of feel that in my body looking at this plant. All this almost wave-like motion. I like to dance in my studio. As an artist, I have to sit still for long periods, and then I'll get some good R&B on and boogie, and it feels good. And then I get back to work. Also pay attention to value and how color and light creates different values on the plant. On your contour drawings, when you see a change in value, you can make a line to indicate that. And if it's a highlight, it'll be a light line. If it's a shadow, it'll be a dark line. And maybe the viewer will understand what that is, maybe they won't, but it still adds some interest to the sketch. Okay? So that's my snake plant. Alright, I've got all my lines drawn. I'll try to get it up a little higher. Here, I'll hold it up too. Let's put this on. That's good. So you can see how I did the leaves, just very simple gestural line. Okay, coming out of my pot. Okay, so now I'm going to start to work with my India ink and my brush. The leaves that are closest to you are going to have the most detail and be the most emphasized. Now, this is granted, this is very shallow depth. I mean, the plant's right in front of you. When we get to perspective, we'll talk about deep depth, like what I showed with some of my, like that little drawing I did in France. But that's, I mean, if the leaf is far enough from the foreground, everything is pretty much in the foreground because the plant's right in front of you. You can make the lines a little less dense with less emphasis. Make them thinner, like if you're using the brush. Don't hold it at such an angle. Make it more, bring the angle up, and that'll make a thinner line. As I work, I'll try to make a point of saying something about that when I notice it. So the snake plant is, well, some of the leaves are yellow, like this one is yellow, and then others are like a light green. And then the center starts to get a dark green, a mid-range value of green, and then a dark green. Okay? Again, to see contrast, squint, and that helps you block color so that you can see changes from light to dark. If you have any blots, like you get too much ink on your brush and you make a blot, well, it's there for good. It's not going to go away, and you just have to live with it. And try to come up with some innovative trick to incorporate it into your sketch. Or, life's not perfect, so if you have a blot, you have a blot. Alright, I'm going to start now with my brush, and I'm going to try to stick to just one brush. That's something I've noticed in Japan, is that there's not as near the selection of like sizes and shapes of brushes like we have in the West. It's more simple, and that's helped me in doing my work, just to try to simplify. Given that, I did see a brush in a Kyoto store that was as big, taller than me. It was like 6 feet tall, the whole brush. It was really neat. I have a picture of it. Okay, so I just did my ellipse, and see, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect. It's not contour where I would go along and exactly draw the edge of that. Now the pot is kind of a crimson. This is a black gray, so I'm gonna just do like even a broken line for that, and that makes it a little lighter than the rim. And notice on my sketch that I drew the leaves right on top of that line. It can help you to get the ellipse accurate, to sort of pretend the plant leaves are transparent. You can erase that later if you did it in pencil. But it helps you get this circle accurately. We're doing good. Okay, so now I'm going into with this, and pay attention, not as much as you did with contour, but like I'm just noticing this edge of my leaf has a notch. Okay, so this is the yellow edge. So I want to kind of wipe off a little bit. And if you have a sponge is a good thing to have around. If I have my paint sponge. I have my sea sponges, but I don't really want to use my sea sponges for this. Okay, I'm going to use this watercolor. You can have a paper towel or a sponge, like when you just want to get a little of the ink off your brush. And I do this in watercolor too. And actually acrylics. Okay, so now I've got more of a grayish, just to get that little notch. Okay. And I liked kind of just lifting my brush off, and it creates that nice taper with just a touch of dry brush, so it gives it a little texture. Okay, now I've got another, this leaf isn't coming towards me. It's foreshortening, and it's also yellowish, so I'm going to keep working with this same brush, same amount of ink. Now, this part of the leaf is in shadow, so I'm going to emphasize that part. Well, I'm losing ink, so I'll get some more ink in this in just a second. Now, I think, Karen, what you were asking, so these leaves are further back. So I'm going to not emphasize those as much. Okay, so I don't want to get more ink. And you'd be surprised how long you can go without refilling your ink. I mean, you can keep working pretty long without it. Without refilling, replenishing. And this leaf back here is even further back. Make sure you can see. So I just barely drew that line. So Karen, you can see I have more emphasis on my lines here, where these leaves are right in front of me, than I did with the line I drew back here for this leaf. It's a gray line, really. And actually, I'm not going to draw that right there. Okay, so I'm going to go back and get some more ink to my foreground and start to draw my foreground leaves. Well, this one's got like a chartreuse, sort of yellow green. Really want to catch, there's a funneling effect of these new leaves right here. So I really want to try to get a sense for that. And this should come around here. This line right there is not in the correct place right there, but I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so just leave it. Don't fuss over it. We're doing a gesture drawing. It should be loose. Now you may be wondering why I didn't center it right in the middle of the page. And there's nothing wrong with centering things right in the middle of the page. It's just that we tend to do that. And there are other ways to compose by enlarging the object, having it go off the page, having some negative space off to one side. So start looking when you're at museums and galleries, looking at how artists compose. This side of this leaf is in darkness, but this side is catching the light. So I want to back off on my pressure and make a more of a thin line. Really trying to create lines that are graceful. This is a very graceful plant, just like a dancer. It's all about grace in this particular sketch. Oh no, I made another line that shouldn't be there. Look, I went over the line. well, it's okay. Just let it go. When you add texture into your leaf, you won't even see that. Some of my best work has come from covering up mistakes. Or figuring out how to integrate a mistake into a work. Now here again, these leaves are further off in the back, so I'm letting the ink run out of my brush, and I'm not replenishing because I want them to be a little lighter, less emphasized. Okay, I've got all my leaves drawn on my plant. Now I can start to go in and add a little more detail. But this is a gestural drawing. It's very quick, loose. It took me about, well, it's more of a sustained, about 20 minutes or a little less. So now I have time, I can go in and start to emphasize pattern on the plant. Where it's dark, where it's light, due to the light source. It's definitely more lighter on the right side than the left side. But I want to keep it loose still. There's almost like tiger stripes going through the darkest green areas of these leaves. So you're going to get to know your plant and see things about it that maybe you haven't observed before. And that's part of why I draw, is it helps me understand what the object, the person, the setting, the culture that I'm working in, because I have to closely observe. I'm going to add more of some dark lines because this is the darkest part of this whole plant. I'm not shading, I'm just adding, working with line, gestural line. I generally try not to go over lines that I've already made. I find that can limit the flow of the line. So I uh, find it makes most sense to work from front to back because of overlap. And overlap is another way that we understand spatial depth. One leaf is in front of another leaf, is in front of another leaf. When you start doing, like I'm doing the details on the leaves now, when you start to do that, you need to pay attention to how the leaf is moving. Like I have a stripe right now on this leaf. I need to make that stripe curve with the plant. Whenever you have any kind of texture on an object that's curving, you need to curve that texture. Or if it's like text on it, like you're trying to draw a label on a jar, that's really hard. You have to curve the letters. These are very thick, waxy leaves, but you may have leaves that have like a vein pattern, and they tend to be very symmetrical. So they'll have a central vein with the veins of the leaf coming out from that central vein. And pay attention to if the leaves are how the leaves are arranged on the stem. Are they directly across from the other leaf, or is it staggered? Now when you have things in shadow, just make your lines darker. Press harder with the brush. Right now I'm in an area of the plant where there's shadows cast by the other leaves near the soil. And some of you are going to really love working with a brush and ink, and others of you are not going to like it at all. And you're going to find it very difficult to control. But it takes practice, and this is kind of in between painting and drawing. But if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. and you can go back to using pen and ink. When I'm sketching, like when I'm traveling, I'm usually using a pen because carrying ink around is not feasible usually. But in my studio, I love working with ink. Those of you, if you saw my huge pieces that were at Art Pace, basically they were gigantic gestural drawings of plants from my yard using color ink. And you can get ink in different colors. I was using Akua Color, which a friend of mine in New York invented. They're for printmakers, but you can also paint with them. And they worked great on the Kozo paper. But Doc Martin is a really good brand. Winsor Newton makes inks. There's acrylic inks now. I don't use those. I've even made my own ink with beets. You can stew beets and make a nice purple red. Oak gall, which is a brownish ink that comes from oak trees. So next time you're in the art supply store, look at all the different inks. Inks work differently than paint. Color inks can be much more saturated, and they dry. Some of them dry with a shiny sheen that's different from paint. White ink does some really interesting things. Now, leaves that are further back, don't emphasize the patterns as much. And that'll give the viewer more of a clue that the leaf is further back in space. So this is a sustained gestural drawing. A good exercise for you is to take like a plant like this and do 5 drawings, do 10 drawings, do 20 drawings, but very quick. Time yourself. Like 1 minute. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If you're interested in learning how to draw the figure, I recommend you take classes at the Capini Academy, which is off McCullough near Hildebrand, and they have figure drawing with nudes, and that's best. That's how you learn anatomy. But you use gestural drawing, gestural line to draw the figure. Or if you go see like a performance with dancers or musicians, that's a good subject matter on. If you have kids around or animals, watching them move and sketching them quickly, or if you take the bus, watching people on the bus, just be careful doing that. If you notice they're doing it and they don't look friendly, then well, stop, or just look away. I had a lot of fun drawing the musicians in Austin this weekend. And I drew people dancing and and you could even, like, some of the leaves in the background, just, like, I'm not even going to finish that leaf. I'm just going to leave that leaf like that. And it just looks like it's further in the back. So you don't have to fill in everything. Add emphasis where you want to add emphasis. Darker areas, areas with texture, will always grab the eye versus areas that are lighter, that are flat, have no texture. So just always keep that in mind. And we are right at time. So I'm almost done. I've got a little bit more to do here. And I could add like a little bit more on my rim there. And that's like a line indicating this is in shadow. So that's what I meant when I said about how you can use a line to indicate changes in value, because it gets darker over here. And I could use stippling to give a little sense for soil, but I captured, I feel like, the texture and the graceful movements of the leaves of this plant. Okay, next week we're going to be studying. We're going to move away from line and we're going to start to study. I'm going to change my camera so you